Hello, and welcome to Courageous Conversations about Mental Health in Circus. I'm Janelle Peters, also known as CircusTalk, and I have the pleasure to facilitate these courageous conversations as part of an ongoing series with CircusTalk, creating space and time and bringing folks who are circus professionals together to talk about important topics in mental health, well-being, and systemic change in our field. Today's episode, we're going to be talking about healthy relationship with substances, addiction, substance abuse, all in the context of circus. I'm really honored to have David and Waverly both here as my guests, each of whom can share from their personal and professional experiences on this topic. A quick content warning, there will be themes of child abuse and neglect, and there will be a mention of a circus performer dying on stage. So please do be aware of that and listen and take breaks accordingly as you need to keep yourself safe and comfortable.
Hello, my name is Waverly Jones. I live in Asheville, North Carolina, she, her pronouns. I have bright pink hair right now. I'm a white person with typically blonde hair, blue eyes, tank top on, lying in bed. About to start this. I own Empyrean Arts in Asheville, North Carolina. We're an aerial and pole art studio. I also tour and teach a whole lot, kind of a semi-retired performer. Happy to be here.
Hello, my name is David Resnick. I am about 5'7" on a good day, blonde hair, blue eyes, white, half Russian, half German. I'm a semi-retired Cirque du Soleil artist / gymnast. I still coach, I still teach. I'm not on tour currently. I was in Cirque for 10 years. And I grew up in a gymnastics facility. I did gymnastics from the time I was 4 till about 18. Coaching is my passion. I do have another job in sales, and that is to make money, but I still keep myself in the gym, and I still stay coaching, and I am sober. Start there.
Nice. Congrats. I am Janelle. My pronouns are she and they. I live in Denver, Colorado. I am a white person with short curly brown hair, maroon turtleneck. I'm wearing my favorite turquoise earrings. I am a contortionist and an aerialist, and I coach both of those disciplines. And I'm also a licensed social worker, so I'm a professional therapist, and I work with a lot of queer folks and then also a lot of dancers, athletes, artists, and performers in my private practice. I'm also on the internet as CircusTalk, which might be how you know me best, and I create a lot of content and try to hold space and open conversations about mental health and well-being in circus, which is why we're here today to talk about healthy relationship with substances in circus. So I'm very, very grateful to have Waverly and David here to share from their personal experience and from their professional experience and their expertise. And we're just going to have a conversation about substances, addiction, a healthy relationship with substances, the process of assessing and changing your relationship with substances, specifically for circus professionals. So I'll start by throwing out our first question, and whoever wants to jump on can, and we'll just take the conversation from there. So the first question is just defining or describing or talking about either how you see addiction or how you see a healthy relationship with substances for circus professionals.
Addiction, I'll just talk about what addiction is kind of like. It's I think that you have an allergy physically to whatever the substance is, and you have a sickness in your mind. There's this like craving. It's an obsession. It's something that you don't necessarily know how to turn off. You can't turn it off. And then if you think about like a person who's allergic to like a cat or an animal, and they know how it's going to make them feel, but they pick up the cat anyways, and they pet the cat. And I think when you look at someone who's in addiction or alcoholism or whatever it is, and they're around another person who's not, that a normie could take a couple of drinks and put it down. Whereas when you're in the presence of an alcoholic or an addict, like they can't compute that. They can't understand that the craving, the physical phenomenon of craving is something past their ability to comprehend and understand. And addiction is, it's it's a dark space because when you're in the midst of addiction, you're ripping through other people's lives like a tornado, and you don't even understand or know what's going on. You acquire a bunch of consequences, and you've hurt so many people that when you do come to being sober, it's like literally looking at a bunch of houses that have just been torn down by a tornado, and those are people's lives. And so I think that there are a lot of people that are in addiction, and I know for myself, it started out as a healthy obsession. You know, drinking was never a thing for me, but when you have one or two glasses of wine, that's great. But when it gets to the point where your addiction becomes a second life of shame and guilt, and you're afraid for people to find out who you really are and what you've been doing, that's where I think it turns into something completely different, and it's no longer healthy. So I guess it's just that inability to control it. And you know, the path of addiction is death. If you like, I don't mean to be like heavy, but
Let's go. Here we are.
Addiction, like we're in it. It literally goes, you're in a place where it's life or death. And it's, you could take another person's life by an action while you're under the influence. And it's just because you are powerless over whatever substance. It could be sex, it could be gambling, it could be overeating. I mean, like whatever it is, it's people, it could be this thing. I mean, we're talking about anything really that you can be addicted to, but when it's got you, it's got you. And usually, like when I've spoken at treatment centers, especially to teen youth, they need to know that it is that. Like if you weren't powerless, your best thinking wouldn't have gotten you here. When your best thinking gets you to a place where you're on your knees and you're powerless, then it's time to surrender to the fact that you're addicted or you're struggling with something. So that's, I don't know, that's just my experience with it. That's what I've seen.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Waverly, before you jump in, sorry, I just want to like reflect back a couple of like key things that I'm hearing that are highlights that I think will be useful to circle back to as the conversation goes on. But as you said, David, the feelings of powerlessness, the feelings of shame, and the feeling of being out of control are things that I think we might come back to as we continue. Waverly, sorry to interrupt you. Go ahead.
I completely agree with those things. I feel like just the term powerless is pretty all encompassing when it comes to addiction and kind of defining the difference between a healthy relationship with substances and maybe, starting to kind of spiral out of control with it. I think that term powerless just really kind of encompasses exactly what addiction is, and it's just kind of the difference between the two. So I would tack onto that. I think that was a good point for sure.
Yeah. Is there anything else that we want to make sure that we say as we're describing or defining a healthy relationship with substances, or describing and defining addiction or an unhealthy relationship?
I'll jump on something really quick. I think there is this feeling that you have inside yourself when it's past a point of being something that was fun or something that was healthy or controllable. And then when you feel it inside you and and I think the first step to healing from a place of addiction is knowing why. Like, why did this start? And it's usually the thing, for me, it was the thing that I held the most secret. I had the most shame around, I had the most guilt around, and it was the catalyst. And it was from when I was young. So I think addiction, you have to look at your family, you have to look at your past history, you have to look at the traumas you suffered when you were younger, you have to look at the family dynamic, you have to there's so many things that you have to work through. Being in a place, and honestly, I mean, everybody's addicted to something. You're addicted to something. You know,
We're at risk of being addicted to something, right?
yeah. And I think that if you don't have the right toolkit to handle life when life is going to throw some punches, because it's going to, if you don't have the right toolkit in place to handle that, it's very easy to fall into addiction. And that happened to me. So I think that just admitting that you're powerless is the first step of really knowing that you're in addiction and you're not alone. I think that's like another key thing, that if there's one thing I want to get across today, is that if you're in this position, like, you're not alone. Because it seems like you are, and it seems like you might think you're the only one, and that's a really selfish thought. Like, get out of your own, like, get off your high horse. You're not like a special one that's just the only one that's addicted to something. Like, there's thousands of people, millions of people out all over the world that are struggling with something. And you know, it's great to be around other people that are struggling with the same thing as you.
Yeah, and it's difficult too. I mean, it's very isolating, you know, like you said, when you kind of have that awakening moment when you look around and you see the damage of the tornado. It's like, I have no one. I've lost everyone. No one has any faith left in me, and understandably so. You know, I've ruined other people's lives with my actions. So I think it's also easy to fall in that I have no one. I am completely alone. I am the only one that's ever been through this kind of like mental spiral, you know? But yeah, there's a lot of good support, free support out there. Yeah, having the proper tools. I mean, for anything in life, it's just privilege. It's like where you're located. It's if you have good family or friends or a support system, you know, all of those things go into play with how easy it is to become addicted and how difficult it might be to get your life back on track. You know, that is another really good point, I think, David, too, that you mentioned.
I'm hearing Waverly so much about how addiction happens in context, right? And I'm hearing this tension between like the isolation and the feeling of being alone and the only one versus like the effect you have on your community and the community that you could theoretically also get support from, which kind of segues into the next question, which is like, how does addiction and how does unhealthy relationship with substances show up in the circus community or the circus communities, as it were? Like, what does it look like specifically for us?
Like, well, we chatted earlier a week ago about this. I kind of felt like in my experience, it's been kind of the opposite effect, where people tend to have something, whether it's cigarettes or caffeine or alcohols, you know, kind of more like, from in my experience, socially acceptable substances that, you know, are widely used and kind of glorified even. I've seen circus kind of push those things out of people's lives more. I haven't had a whole lot of experience with people struggling with debilitating, you know, and I hesitate to say that because, you know, a nicotine addiction can be debilitating in ways, but I have not encountered anyone like heavily addicted to heroin or cocaine in my experience in the circus industry, because those things just kind of aren't conducive to getting anywhere with your training or a career in it if you decide to go that path. But that's just been my personal experience. So I'm not sure what others have experienced, you know.
Yeah.
I know that it was funny in Cirque du Soleil. I think it's the amount of coffee and cigarettes consumed on a daily basis for shows is like freaking high, you know.
See them all out back, just puffing
Yeah,
away.
and I mean, I'll say like it was a thing to go out like with my Russian friends and have a like cigarette and a cup of coffee, like a cappuccino between shows, because honestly, I don't want to eat because I have to go swing around a bar in another 45 minutes. I'll maybe grab some fruit and I'll go out with the guys, and it was social. But it's very calm. Like, the cool thing about circus is you're dealing with a lot of different cultures, right? And that's like a very normal thing. I remember I was in Japan and I saw Kohei Uchimura is like the best male gymnast ever. The first thing he did when he came backstage was he had a Diet Coke in his hands, and he went outside and smoked. And a lot of the Japanese guys did. So I remember it's a cultural thing. Nicotine is actually like a natural supplement. It can be used to help focus, to bring energy. So I think that and same thing with cannabis, it can be used in a healthy manner. CBD is great. I used to take CBD baths all the time. So like there are healthy things, caffeine, like in the circus, um, that I saw often. And it's people, I think people in general life will like wind down where places where marijuana is legal, they'll wind down with a joint rather than a glass of wine. And that's like people's way of relaxing, which is totally cool. I can't do that, but I really appreciate those that can. And I think like the heavier stuff, it's pretty evident when someone is going down that path and going down that path at an accelerated rate. I think that the behaviors start showing themselves, manipulation, self-seeking, selfishness, self-centeredness. They're acting out of fear. Um, they might start missing things, not showing up. The body changes, the face changes. And I just know that the harder drugs are always there wherever you go, whatever you do. Like you can't ever remove yourself from. I mean, you can remove yourself from the actual situation, but like in every city you go to, it's there. The people are there. So I think it's who you surround yourself with is a big thing. When you're around people in the circus that have healthy relationships with those things, I think it's great. And I was around that for a long time. And then I think when like life gets tough, you make the wrong choices. The one thing I'll say is you're when you leave Circ or when you transition out of a professional obsessive thing that you do with anything in the entertainment, I think you have to be super mindful and careful that you don't fall into something once you transition. Because what you might have been, like you said, to do shows every night and to stay on top of things, you can't really ever, it does protect you in that sense where it doesn't ever allow you to like go to that next level. But by using a little bit, what it can do is it can open up the floodgates very easily if you make the decision of hanging out with the wrong group of people, or if some like I had one of my best friends passed away, and then a girl I was dating passed away. Then both my grandmas passed away. I had full shoulder so a lot of things happened in a condensed period of time, but I still had performing to save me. It was like my savior, even though I was crying on stage every night and having anxiety attacks. Like it was the one peaceful place for me was on the stage. The moment that went away and I didn't have any other spiritual tools or like a toolkit to cope, the floodgates were open, and I made a couple wrong decisions. And then before I knew it, I mean, felt like I was in a snowstorm and I couldn't see 6 inches in front of my face. And so I think that you have to be very, very cautious in times of transition. Things can kind of fall apart, especially when you're leaving one obsession. Like performing, you know how obsessive it is. It's your life. It's you breathe it, you sleep it, you eat it. So that was just an experience I had especially when I transitioned. What was healthy and Circ was a protection then was not, and I felt really lost. And then what we talked about, purpose.
Mhm. Yeah, I was just gonna say I did a pre-interview with each of you individually, and both of you brought up the concept of having a purpose and a sense of purpose as being one of the most protective things that circus does. And so Waverly, I'm sure you have stuff to say about that too, but I loved that that was very present for both of you.
Yeah, and I remember one of your posts on Instagram about I reshared it recently about how just circus artists in general tend to be drawn to the extreme, or like professional athletes, you know, like high level gymnasts or what have you. You tend to be drawn to like excelling and going as far and hard and putting everything into it as you can as possible, and that's exactly how, you know, you can spiral out of control with substances as well. So, you know, as someone that was formerly struggled with drugs and alcohol severely prior to my circus career, yeah, I would say that it kind of had the opposite effect on me. Like I was able to channel that same extremeness of myself, that kind of like just all in, balls to the wall kind of personality that I have. And that's why I was able to progress and get so far with circus so quickly, because it kind of became my job within like 5 years of taking my first class, because I was just like, just by my sweetheart's going to get COVID tested. So yeah, it was a good outlet for me to take that extreme energy, and I could still use it. I didn't have to get rid of it. I didn't have to change myself or like change who I was. I could still be really extreme and balls to the wall, but in like a very productive way. Now, I will say I've definitely done some not great things when it comes to my training, like overtrained or, you know, pushed beyond safe limits, especially in my early 20s. So, they can have that same effect in the opposite way as well. But yeah, that's some thoughts that came to mind too when David was sharing just now.
Yeah. I think, just to reflect back on kind of the overall conversation that you guys have shared about this is just that, again, I'm hearing a lot of tensions as we're talking. We're like, circus is protective and circus is an environment that makes it very easy to fall into addiction. Circus can replace addiction, circus can lead to it, and it's fascinating to hear and to think about. And I hope that it's helpful for folks who are listening and watching to kind of like open this up and fluff it out and see some of the ways that these things relate. But it keeps coming back to the context, where you're coming from, who you're around, what you're doing, like how much control you have over what you're doing and who you're around. And those things are so different for different people depending on your walk of life. So it's just like there's so many factors. There's always a lot to think about. And I love that you're naming so many of them, both of you.
And I think that is interesting too, that I feel like we kind of come from two different backgrounds, David and I, as far as like how, you know, we have a very lot of similarities, but like how we wound up where we are and kind of what our lives are like now. I grew up in a home that was riddled with drugs and alcohol. Like my parents were addicted to drugs. All three of my younger brothers were born premature. My youngest brother was in the hospital for the first 4 months of his life. Like he nearly died because he was hooked on crack when he was born. We were put in foster care, and then I had to live with my father. He was a raging alcoholic. He was abusive. I moved back in with my mom when I was 13, and I started using drugs like very hard because that's what we did. You know, it was like everywhere around me. So we had kind of talked about this a little bit, Janelle and I, about how, you know, I still do drink, and I use cannabis, and I have coffee, and, you know, occasionally we'll smoke cigarettes. So there are still substances in my life. And sometimes people will ask, well, aren't you afraid that like you could wind up shooting up heroin again? You know, you could wind up back in a ditch. And I don't feel that way because there's not that part of my life I'm not escaping anymore. I grew up in like a very abusive, like neglectful, drug-ridden home. That's not my life at all anymore. You know, like all those people are dead now. I don't have any of them in my life anymore in any way. So there's nothing for me to be escaping. So I am able to have healthy relationships with certain substances in my life because there's not a root issue that I'm trying to remedy or nurture, or there's not something that I'm trying to like heal from anymore. You know what I mean? Kind of like what you were saying, David, with like how it all started for you, something that happened in your childhood that you had guilt and shame and, you know, negative feelings around. That's how it started. I that kind of part of my life is not there anymore. So I'm lucky in that way that, you know, I'm not running and escaping my reality anymore. So yeah, very grateful for that I survived that part of my life despite all my surroundings just being completely saturated with drugs, alcohol, and abuse. So That would be my background with drugs.
Thanks for sharing that. I'm super glad you're here as well, like generally and also like right here in this conversation.
Thank you. Me too.
Yeah, thank you for sharing your as a friend of Bill's, you'd be like, you're a miracle. Like we're all miracles.
Yeah.
I didn't grow up really around drugs. I mean, I did gymnastics from my dad owned a gym. I grew up in a gym. I grew up with a Russian coach from the time I was 3. He was in the flying cranes from the Moscow Circus. So we would train in the morning, and then I would go with all the Russian boys whose fathers were in the trapeze act. Which if you've never seen the flying cranes, they're still around today. Their Instagram is quite fun. But we'd go into the show at night, and so I did gymnastics. Grew up in a broken family. My parents were never married or anything. Not a lot of drugs though. It just my uncle died of a heroin overdose, and it wasn't a really common thing for me growing up. But I did have some division and stuff that happened when I was 16 to 18, where basically all the parenting I had in my life kind of dissipated. My dad moved. There was some separation in the family, and I kind of went from, and then I quit gymnastics at the same time. So basically all the structure I had in my life was gone. And I'm 18 and I was it like 35 hours a week in the gym, now free. And no direction really.
That sounds dangerous.
Yeah.
Yeah, super dangerous. And so I like tried to do the whole college thing, gave it a good old college try. I got like a 1.5 GPA my first semester. But I tried ecstasy for the first time when I was 18. And I remember because of gymnastics, like you're not very social, you're not like hanging out with people from school. I went to a school where it was the football team. If you weren't part of the football team, you were kind of a loser. I was a gymnast. So, jokes that I was like a homo and this and like that and another. And until I actually like walked into school with some USA national team sweats on, and like that was the only thing that could, grab any sort of attention. But yeah, it's trying ecstasy. I felt like I was a part of something. It made me feel good. But yeah, I quickly learned a lesson of when you're hanging out with the wrong people, bad things happen. And it happens quickly, and it happens before you can think twice. And I'm lucky that I'm alive and not in the ground, because there's multiple situations that I've been in where it could have easily gone the other direction. When Circ came, kind of like the way that you found purpose when you started doing Circus and it helped you, that's what it was for me in the beginning. It was super healthy. I was in a show, I was in Totem with really good people. I learned how to be a professional there. I learned how to be a great athlete. I learned what it was to like the professionalism, respect. The captain of my team was Japanese, and I learned like the Japanese way, like the way of the samurai. And there was a lot of learning to be had. But one thing I had along the way was I've had quite a few concussions, and I think mental health is also something that goes hand in hand with compulsive behavior and addiction. And it's something that you can't see. So I think there's a bit of a stigmatism in that way towards it, because you can't see it. So it's like, oh, you don't have a problem. Well, I remember one of the concussions I hit head to head with a guy in a show, and it jacked up my ability to control my emotions for about a year and a half afterwards. And having to do a high stress job at the same time of recovering from that kind of an impact was really, really difficult. And people didn't understand at the time much about concussions. And then like moving forward through the 10 years I was in Circ, I get to like the back end, and right after my Jan Arnaud, I don't know if you know him, but he was in the show Volta. He fell in straps, and he died. And the day after that, I started to resent God right after he died. I resented God because why did he take Jan and not me? Or why am I still here and he's not? The day afterwards, I went to Montreal and I was training, and I hit my face on the bar, broke my nose, and I had a bad concussion. And I remember healing. When I healed from that concussion, I had some anxiety that went, I don't know what part of the brain I mean, I hit the bar here. So, I mean, my nose doesn't look too bad, but it was, I had anxiety attacks after that. And I went back on tour in Corteo, and I remember having full blown anxiety attacks before walking on stage for the act, and like having to somehow get my shit together and focus. And then at the end of Corteo is about a funeral procession. Like Morrow, the main character, flies away on a bike and he rides off into the heavens. And I'm in this costume, and the costume I'm wearing is Jan's brother's costume. Like that's whose tag is in it. So the whole thing for me was, it was so much to compute and handle, and I was struggling with healing from a concussion and having a resentment. Resentments are something that can fuel addictions. You can like harbor resentment towards something, and usually, for at least I'm speaking from my experience, my resentments is because I'm selfishly making it about myself. So a good example is Jan's death. I'm resentful towards God for it. I'm making it about myself. Like, why am I still here and he's not? Instead of paying respect and showing love and compassion and understanding towards what happened, I'm making it about me. And that's not really the right way to operate. So doing a lot of inner work and self-inventory, which it sounds like you've done because of the stuff in your past, and you've been able to move forward with it, which I commend. I know that that's not easy to do, and I didn't expect for it to happen for me later in life rather than on the front end. But it just, trying to keep it all together and act like everything was okay, sunshine and rainbows. I took my first sniff of cocaine and it was like all that disappeared. And that was freaking scary. I remember that. And, it wasn't shortly after. I only used for about a year, and it went from fun to being completely powerless on my knees, carpet surfing in a dark room by myself, like extremely quickly. And that process was a miracle that I made it, and it happened 30 years into my life. So whether it happens at the beginning or it happens at the end, I think you can learn from both. And I can't even, that's very commendable that you were able to get past it and do what you did. Do what you're doing now, like running a studio, and kudos.
It's not easy. Like you said, thank you. And thanks for sharing all of that. That's a lot. That's some really heavy stuff. And I can relate to a lot of it. I mean, a lot of that is like what my life was like growing up in general, like, my parents were really bad on crack cocaine throughout my childhood, and all my brothers were premature. I was practically raising my brothers. And then when I was the reason we all went to foster care, my mom wanted me to pee in a cup. And I knew that if I told the truth to the social worker, that we would be taken out of the home. So I decided to be honest. And I told the social worker, my mom has me pee in cups. She was using my urine basically to pass drug tests. And after that, that was like the catalyst that destroyed my whole family, you know, or kind of like tore us apart as far as like living together. And that's when I went and lived with my father, and he was really bad on drugs and alcohol and struggles a lot with addictions in a lot of ways. And in that time, that's when I started experimenting with marijuana, and I wasn't really drinking very much, but it was when I moved back in with my mom when I was 13, after those, you know, tumultuous years with my father, that I really started spiraling out of control, because my mom was prescribed many different drugs for all different things. You know, she had a lot of injuries and mental health issues that she was struggling with. So a lot of back pain. So she kind of went down prescription drug, that whole path pretty easily, considering those things. And also still had struggled with drugs from the time she was like 13. So that's when things really spiraled out of control. I mean, I had a friend die on my living room floor. My house got raided. I nearly overdosed and died a few times. I started using heroin intravenously at like 15. By the time I was 16, I went to jail. And what really saved my life was my grandmother, my German grandmother. I told her, I'm going to kill myself if you don't come get me. And she did that day. She like drove down 4 hours from where she lived at the time and packed up my whole house and like my bedroom. And I moved in with her when I was 17. That was after I ran off to Florida and tried to get emancipated from my mom there, and tried to like gain some rights to myself, with a friend's family who knew how like out of control the situation was. My mom was like selling ecstasy and acid and pills and marijuana and like all kinds of shit. It was really bad. And I wanted to be sober so badly. I remember being like 16 and dating someone that was like 15 years older than me, and just being like, this is completely out of control. And like, I want to be sober so bad, but there's no way in hell I could ever do that here. Like, I'm out of control. Like, this whole situation is out of my control, and this is not what I want, but this is what I have. So moving in with my grandmother like changed my entire life. I had dropped out of high school at that point. I'd failed ninth, 10th, and 11th grade. I went to summer school twice. And by that time I moved in with my grandma, I got back into school, and she saved my life, you know, and she had like already seen my mom nearly lose everything. My mom had lost everything, you know, and she had experienced that with my mom for decades. So when I was like, please help me, she jumped on it. And then I started school, got back, you know, got everything back together. I stopped using drugs. But, you know, years later, when I started taking circus classes, I just took like a recreational aerial class. I did gymnastics briefly growing up, and I loved it. Like, that's what I wanted to be when I grew up, was like an Olympic gymnast. And I would have thrown everything into it had I been able to, but we were poor, and I had 4 brothers, and my parents were not prioritizing t-ball and softball and gymnastics and things like that. They were smoking crack, and I didn't, you know, I did gymnastics for like 2 years, but that's where I fell in love with like movement arts. And in a way, I'm like maybe fortunate that I didn't get to pursue it like I wanted to, you know, like I don't know that I would have been interested in trying aerials someday. What if I had just been like, I'm like burnt out on this type of movement? I might not have had any interest in aerial arts. So I try to look at it like that. But yeah. So when I started doing aerials, I excelled at it pretty quickly, I guess, because of my gymnastics background. And it was finally like something for me. It was like finally something I could be proud of myself for. Like, I know a lot of that sounds like things I should be proud of myself for, but I was like 20 and I was just like, I have nothing. Like, I didn't even graduate high school. I have no family. Like, I have nothing. Those like successes didn't stand out to me as anything that I should be proud of at that time. So yeah, it pretty quickly evolved into like performing, you know, for fun, and then professionally. And then this idea came up of like opening the studio. And that's when I started having, like, when we started building the studio and creating it and pulling it all together, like debilitating panic attacks. Like, I had to put myself on medication again, because I've been on medication off and on my whole life. And I remember, I mean, I would lose, like, one panic attack I had, I couldn't control my face. Like, my lips went blue. It was like I was, you know, in a freezing cold environment, but I wasn't. My fingers and hands went numb. I couldn't control my body. It was terrifying. So, like, not having coping skills at all, and trying to do something huge, like open a business, much less like we're like one of the only aerial and pole studios, I think we are, in North Carolina. So it was like this massive project we were putting on. And I didn't know what the hell I was doing. I was like 26 years old. I have no like reference for like how to run a business, or much less like get through the day. So yeah, I can really empathize with the anxiety disorder for sure. I still struggle a lot. I started therapy in 2 weeks. I found a therapist, by the
You
way.
did?
Yeah, I
Yes.
did. I've meaning to tell you. So yeah, I found someone that's awesome that I'm gonna start talking to, because I have a lot of grief to sift through. My mother died of a drug overdose in 2017, and I haven't spoken to my father since. My stepdad died of like all kinds of complications that he had from drugs and alcohol. Um, and then my grandmother, my German grandmother, passed away in 2020. So that has just been like, that was life changing for me. So yeah, that's kind of my story with it. And it is hard. Um, but I'm trying really hard to rely on like coping tools and like lean on the people in my life that um want me to, that have space for me to, that I trust. So yeah, thanks for letting me share all that. That's kind of my story,
Yeah,
a deeper
Thank you.
version of my story. Thank you.
thanks.
I think so I'm in a 12-step recovery program, and it goes by attraction rather than promotion. And when people share their stories, that is typically what attracts um, someone that's in a place of struggle. When they see someone who's been through what they've been through and they hear it, and then they're like, oh, I kind of want what that person has now. Like, how did you do it? Well, how did I do it? This is how I did it. And you kind of just take their hand, and it's our responsibility to like put that hand out there. And like, did anything I say resonate with you? Well, like, yeah, okay. Um, is what you're doing working? Well, no. Okay, well, you want to try something? Yeah. And that, I mean, like, that's literally what all it takes to like radically change someone's life. And when I'm sure you've Waverly been in situations where there wasn't necessarily someone there to like put their hand out for for you. I know for me, like when I was in the midst of all of that, there wasn't someone who clearly like, if I was in the water, underneath the water, there wasn't a hand that came in and like grabbed me and pulled me out. And I think it just points to the fact that I have to be willing to seek it. It has to be something you want
Yeah.
from the jump. And one thing I know is that from listening is you've found purpose in what you do. And that's um I think that's the key is, and you found it through being uncomfortable and through discomfort. Um, I think it's really, I coach kids, and I see this in athletes that come from extremely wealthy not just wealthy families, but I can literally see a massive difference between a kid who has purpose and a kid who doesn't. A kid who's got everything handed to him and a kid that doesn't. And there's like this extra gear that they go to. Um, if we're conditioning and it's tough, then there's like this gap that's created, and it's because one kid just is living with a purpose, and that like translates all the way into life. How can you still find purpose when you're 80? I don't. And purpose like can be something like I through getting sober, my purpose is to help other people. Like my purpose is to like find a way to be of service and help other people. And like I want to save someone's life, because if I can do it, anybody can do it. Like if you can do it, anyone can do it. And it doesn't matter if you're an Olympic athlete or if you are from the streets. Addiction can bring you to the same spot, like real fast. It doesn't matter who you are or what you're made of, how much money you have. I've heard stories of people blowing millions like that. So I think there's like, when we share our stories, there's a common place where you can empathize and have compassion and understanding for what another human has been through, especially times like now where, I mean, it's real, say the least.
One of the things I'm noticing is that both of you are naming so much deep, unhealed grief and trauma, right? And that those things are there, and then that addiction has kind of overlaid it, right? Because we had this pain and we needed to find some way to have a rest from the pain or to try to feel better from the pain. And then the thing that we found was a substance that would work for a little while and then became a problem on top of the problem, right? And that both of you are naming not only like, oh, do I need to change my relationship with this particular substance, but also I need to heal my grief and my trauma and my like deep pain in my relationship with myself. And as a therapist, just like hearing how closely connected those things are and the way that both of you are thinking and talking is incredibly powerful. I'm hoping that it's very like obvious and powerful to folks who are listening, but I really wanted to like put a fine point on that because that is one of the key takeaways from this, I think.
One thing that I think is, I don't know if people really, some people don't like to talk about it, but having a higher power, and it doesn't matter what your higher power is. Like, your higher power can be a plant, which I mean, I wouldn't recommend, but like your higher power can be, it's something bigger than yourself, you know? And so my obsession to use went away. Like, honestly, I don't, it doesn't cross my mind. I don't think about it. And it happened when I fully surrendered to, for me, it's God. And I remember this. So um, I'll share like a little bit about a relapse. And I was working this program, and it like, so I'm powerless over my addiction. I need to obviously get some power. And the power is not going to be my own power, because my own power got me here. So I got to have this power bigger than myself. Okay. So I like tried that, and I thought I gave it, like, I really did think I gave it an honest effort, which I didn't. But there was this guy, I was in this retreat in Colorado, and this was when I was living in Idaho. And I went to this, I had a hunch, I paid money. I went to this 3-day retreat in the Colorado Rockies, and I met this guy who is now like my close brother, and is the reason I moved to Minnesota. We spent 3 days together. We did this thing called holotropic breath work. I don't know if you've ever heard of holotropic breath work, but it's 60 minutes of, and you're laying on your back, and you're basically over oxygen. I don't know what it does to your body, but like, I went into like full like cramp mode. I felt like I was on a rocket ship. It's an exogenous release of DMT in the lungs. And I saw everyone in my life that had passed away, and I went through this experience, and I cried like that type of crying and convulsive crying where it's like there's like blackness like leaving your body. And it's this, in the beginning of the breath work, I felt like these black hands were choking me. I thought I was going to die. And then I came to this like release of this like crying that was so relieving but painful. And this guy, he was looking over me, like guiding me through it. And then it was his turn, so we swapped. And I see this guy, mine was super painful, but I see him get up, and he's on his feet with his hands up in the air, crying, talking to God and dancing with him. And he's like happy. And I'm over here like on the ground, going through like it was horrific, but it was good. It was cleansing. But then I was looking at this guy like, dang, like he's connected to something. Like, I want that. So I packed my truck and drove out to Minnesota, and just like started my life over completely. And I ended up relapsing here in Minnesota for less than 24 hours. But I remember in that moment, there was this moment where I thought I should get on my knees and pray. before the relapse happened. And I said, nope, I'm not going to do that. Because I was holding resentment still towards God for Jan's death. I was holding resentments towards God from stuff in my childhood, and I didn't want to do it. So I was like, you know what? I'm not going to do it. So like 12 hours later, I'm on the side. I got robbed on the side of a street, and I heard God's voice in my ear, and he said my name, and then he said, sit down. And I remember sitting down on the sidewalk, and I was laughing, kind of crying, laughing. And I thought to myself, well, maybe those people needed it more than I needed the money more than I did. And it was this, I had this moment of complete surrender, like complete, absolute surrender to the fact that my self-will, I chose to not pray to something bigger than myself. I chose to do my own self-will. And then here I am, like felt like I was being punished by dad, in a way. And that was I had a spiritual experience, and that changed something in me that it was this override. And then I fully just started to pray in the mornings and meditate and pray in the evenings. And in the evenings, I thank God for what I'm grateful for. And in the mornings, I do this prayer, and I'm going to share it if that's okay. But it's, God, I offer myself to thee to build with me and to do with me as thy will. Relieve me of the bondage of self so I may better do thy will. Take away my difficulties as victory over them bears witness to those I would help of thy power, thy love, and thy way of life. May I do thy will always. And this prayer gets me out of myself in the beginning of my day. Like it removes me from what I want to do. And it brings this peace over me that allows me to be of help and service to other people, which is my purpose. And I can't even begin to explain why things have happened the way they've happened in the last 10 or almost a year. I can't explain why they're happening, how they've happened, how I've met the people that I've met. I would just say it hasn't been me. And I know that if I would have tried to like conjure that and make that happen myself, it wouldn't have happened. So I think if you're in a spot where you're battling this kind of stuff, it's got to be something bigger than you. And
you're just segueing like perfectly into the last question. So I'm gonna like throw the last question in, and then I also want to hear from Waverly some as well. But David, you're working with a 12-step program that is working really wonderfully for you, and also like there are lots of ways to approach healing addiction, healing trauma and grief, right? And so if God is doing it for you, God is doing it for you. If there's another way that you want to approach it, there's a lot of options out there. And so I would love to hear, David, more from you, obviously, and then like Waverly as well, just like what are some of the things that have worked for you in terms of getting support from other people, whether it's formal or informal?
David, just out of curiosity, how long were you sober before your relapse, and how long has it been since then?
Before I was 10 months. And I was kind of like not really, I basically put myself in a small town in the mountains and wasn't really doing much in terms of self-work. And then I'm coming up on a year since
Congratulations.
the relapse.
Yeah, it's a big deal.
I've done 12-step programs my whole life.
Yeah, I figured.
Yeah, my parents were forced to go growing up as part of like, court ordered things. And then I dated someone and in high school and they tried to get sober. And then all through 2020, I dated one of my best friends of 20 years that we had dated in the 8th grade and then reconnected 2 decades later. He got sober. He just hit 2 years earlier this month. So I would do AA with him a lot. I would go to a lot of the meetings, and I wasn't sober, but I still got a lot out of the meetings in so many ways, from just like people's sharing, and like Janelle and I spoke about that too when we met ahead of time, was just like how healing it is for me to talk about this kind of stuff, because there's not always an appropriate platform to do so. Like sometimes I like mention it in social media, and like I'm very honest and open with my life and my struggles and what's been going on always, and like how I wound up where I am. I have no shame in that. And I'm very open, and that's like a huge thing that helps me, is just like talking about it and naming it and sharing it with other people. And like oftentimes people are like, holy shit. And I forget that like not everybody has had life like that, because I'm like, no, this was just like a Tuesday, 10 years ago or 15 years ago. But yeah, honestly, like being honest and open about it with other people, and then harboring this community of amazing instructors and students here that I get to share that with, that I think gain a lot of strength and power from, just secondhand from me and my experiences, and the solace and like healing that they find inside Empyrean Arts is a massive thing that keeps me going and keeps me on track. Like my students, like I don't really have a lot of family. I have 4 brothers, but I'm like kind of like the matriarch of my family anymore. Like my mother's passed, all my grandparents, my father, he is alive. I have no idea where he is or what he's up to though. So I feel sometimes like I'm just like a planet, just kind of like careening through the universe, just like not tethered to anything or anyone, which doesn't always feel good. And then other times I feel like extremely connected to my community. So I try to like hold on to that. And like Empyrean Arts is like why I get up every day, is to like show up for instructors and staff and students and just try to help people heal. Like people have breakdowns in the studio all the time. It's so good. Like people have to go sit outside and cry and sob. I'm so sorry. I'm like, no, this is like it. This is where this is a safe space for that. Like, it's okay. Like I see you, I see your pain. I've been there. I probably am there. Like I struggle still, a lot, like I have been in therapy off and on my whole life, and it's difficult to get back into it, so I'm going to try that again here soon. Yeah, so that's probably one of the biggest things for me, is not only like my close friends that have nothing to do with circus, but like my people, the people that like look to me and come to me on a weekly basis to like heal and grow, that it's big for me.
That makes me want to train at Empyrean Arts. I'm like, I want to start driving. I'll be there soon.
Yes, you want to teach? Come
Let's
teach.
go.
Y'all come to Asheville.
Yes.
We'll go tubing, and then we'll go hiking, and then
Oh my God,
like,
sold.
Fly
I'll
fishing.
see you
There's
soon.
fly fishing in Asheville.
don't get me started. I love to fish.
Do you?
Yes, I do.
Word.
Love fishing. I don't fly fish. I typically I go to Florida a lot. Like I was telling Emily earlier, I love going to Florida, and like deep sea fishing is really what I like ocean.
Wow.
Yeah, love it.
So excited.
But yeah, come visit.
Awesome.
I was to say one of the it's cool that you know the rooms, because I the circus, you meet some pretty interesting people, right? Like we're surrounded by like
We are those
we're
people.
Yeah.
like you get it. And then when I left touring, because I was on the road for more than 10 years, but I'm like, how am I gonna exist a normal life? I didn't know. I was so full of fear, like fear of the unknown. Like, how am I going to exist amongst normal people? And then I went into a recovery program, and I was like, okay, I'm home. Like you said, being able to talk to people and
listen
like
to them.
listen. Just sometimes I go and I just sit and I listen.
Yeah.
And I'm like blown away. Like last night I had a night like that where I just listened, and I learned so much. And I think we live in a society where people need to shut up and listen more, just in general. I'll say mentorship is a really crucial thing, I think. Because when I sat down with my mentor the first time, And he looked at me in the face and he said, "Do you understand this is life and death?" And I looked at him and I said, "Yes, I do." And I think in an honest space for people that are out there that do use, there's a lot of dangerous stuff out there. And there's a lot of people that are dying because they don't know what is in things. So I think it's a very different world than it used to be. And it's very scary, and people are being taken at a rapid pace. So when he said that to me, he said it to me and it went like through my soul. And it like, I got it. And then he said, he looked at me, he asked me to read a segment from a book, and I read it, and he said, "Does any of that correlate with you?" And as I was reading it, I was crying. And I said, "Yeah." And he goes, "It's okay, you're broken." And I just freaking lost it, because inside I knew I was. And for someone who was sober for 35 years to sit in front of me and just tell me that, and then tell me it was going to be okay, and that because I made a
Not to
mistake.
be okay.
Yeah, and that because I made a mistake, I'm not a mistake. Because I fucked up, I'm not a fuck up. Because I hurt somebody, I'm not a hurtful person.
Right.
Like, and like I had to learn to forgive. The first person I had to learn to forgive was myself. And in order to forgive myself, I had to take responsibility and accountability for all my shit. And when you start to do that, it's not a fun process. But I had someone that guided me through the process. And like the amount of times where I've looked at my stuff on a piece of paper and gone, ugh, and like wanted to just like get up and walk away. But that's where, if I can't sit with myself in meditation and like have honest conversations with myself and really look at myself, um, no one's watching. I'm not doing it for 10,000 people that are watching me while I'm on stage. Like this, I'm doing for myself, because the things I want in life, like I want a family, if I want those things, like my actions have to consistently, by doing the next right thing always, like it has to lead towards that. And when I was in addiction, it wasn't what I wanted and what I was doing. It was like freaking throwing gasoline on a fire. Like it was not happening. So I think for people out there that want help, like if you're straight up in addiction or alcoholism or whatever, go to a detox center. And I don't think you really get to choose which one you go to. You just got to go. You just got to go, and you got to like get out of the insanity. And then it's really hard to do this thing by yourself. So get around people, pray about it. I think a prayer, meditation, self-talk, positive talk, whatever you want to call it, you got to start. For me, I had to start talking. Like I had to start just whatever. I remember
Like
the first
talking
time.
out loud as opposed to like,
Yeah. So
yeah.
I remember having this conversation with something like this. I was like, okay, I was sitting in my bed a few days sober at the very beginning, and I went, okay, God, I feel stupid doing this right now. Like I was telling, this is like, and I'm like kind of crying. I'm like, this is ridiculous. I'm in a dark room. No one's here listening. And I just started saying like, I want wealth, and I don't want wealth financially. I want wealth. Like I want richness in family. I want richness in relationships. I want richness in sobriety. Like I want all these things. I have no idea. I'm like, I don't know. And it's just me sitting in my bed having a conversation with, at the time I thought it was, whatever's out there. I said, whatever's out there, just listen. And it started like that. And then it's the action of it. I don't know, Waverly, if you do anything like that, but like feels kind of stupid and silly. Sometimes when I'm driving, I talk to myself, but that was my way of starting.
Yeah, I do. I just give thanks a lot. Like when I'm like lying in bed at night, I just like bundle up on my covers and I'm like, fuck, thank you. So, like, whoever, whatever, like, thank you so much. Like, I have a roof over my head. I have a warmth right now. I have clothes on. Like, I have things, like, coming from a place where I didn't know if we were going to have a place to live, like I grew up in a very unstable, insecure environment. So like, I don't take it for granted a single day of my life that like I have a sound mind and I have a pretty good head on my shoulders. And I, have a business, a really amazing business that changes people's lives. I give thanks for it all the time. So I do that, and I spend a lot of time alone. I've lived alone for like the past couple decades. I've been lucky to have like lived most of my 20s and some of my 30s alone. So I'm childless and I'm seeing someone, but like I'm, not married. So yeah, I'm comfortable being alone, and I cry a lot. So I try to like cry as much as I can when I have time to do it. Sometimes I don't want to start it because I don't know when it's going to stop. I'm like, I don't have time for this today. But then maybe I'll like come home and like just sob a little in the shower and like get it out of the way. So I try to like release a lot, and I rely like very heavily on like humor and like silliness to like get through trauma. Like I'm like big into memes, so like I share a lot of memes. I get a lot of feedback from people who like just get joy out of like the silly shit that I share on a regular basis. So like just like giving thanks, crying when I can, and like just being silly and like surrounding myself with people who are also silly and supportive, like is good for me, I would say. And I'm lucky to live here in Asheville where I can like, I walk down the street and there's like a river or a waterfall, or like I really like being around water and like running, moving water. Growing up at the beach, like the ocean is a huge thing for me. So like being in nature is really important to me. And luckily I mentioned living alone and being alone so much because I am okay alone. I know some people don't feel the same way. Like they tend to want to lean on people or feel better with a roommate situation or in a partnership. I've just never personally been that way. Like I just have never really wanted to or been able to rely on others in that way. So I'm just kind of used to being alone. So going out into nature, whether I'm with someone or not, is like going on a walk or a run or going to the gym. God, I get so much healing done in the gym just from like pounding weights and running on the treadmill, or not even the studio, not even like aerial arts, like just working out is a really good release for me. So those are kind of like my day-to-day coping skills. Hoping to gain more through seeing someone soon for therapy, which I'm really looking forward to. We're going to be focusing on like tools to cope, which is like so essential, but so many of us didn't get those through childhood. So
exactly.
Looking forward to that.
That's awesome.
One of my mentors told me, he said, you want to know how, and we'll speak to sobriety, what I'm going through. He said, you want to know how you stay sober? And I said, how's that? And he goes, you pick up the phone. But I'm like, what do you mean? And he goes, call someone, get out of yourself, be of
It's so hard
service.
to do. It's so hard to do. And that's been such a huge thing for me to try to go through. I mentioned this earlier, is like leaning on people that have the space for me to do so, and not wanting to take it all on by myself and just be like, I don't want to bother anyone with my shit, or I don't want to put this on anyone else, or I should be able to handle this on my own. Like I should be strong enough. I shouldn't have to reach out. Like that's so ridiculous. I feel so good. And I'm so proud of my friends and people who lean on me for support, actually reach out. Like how good does that feel when someone actually contacts you in a moment of need? Like no one's ever like, oh God, this person needs me right now. Like people that love you aren't going to be like that, and if they are, then they don't love you and they shouldn't be in your life. But I'm always so proud of people for like picking up the phone and reaching out and asking for help, or even just like needing someone to vent to. Like maybe I don't have anything to say and I just am like, yeah, this sucks. I hear you. This sucks.
Yeah.
You're valid. This is valid. That is huge. So I think that's such a big part, is like reaching out and leaning on people.
Yeah, it's the community. And sometimes I call someone and it's not even, I have nothing really to say other than like, how are you doing? And not, I'm good. Like I don't like small talk like that. I'm like, no, like for real, how are you doing? Like what's going on in your life, and it's coming from that place. And it just takes you out of yourself. I met this cat down in Texas. He was 40 something years sober. He's an ex-Vietnam vet. And he used to be a tunnel rat in Vietnam. And he blew my mind. And I said, what's the secret to this thing? Like, how do you, and he said something so freaking simple. He said, never, ever, ever give up on yourself. And he's like, it doesn't matter how hard it gets. It doesn't matter where you're at. Don't ever give up on you. And then he said, when you take action to go into something, like go all the way in and sit your ass all the way down. And he said, pardon my French, but he said, shut the fuck up and listen. Or his exact words. And like, it's so true. It's just being, you gotta be humble and be willing to like listen and be of service and let whatever that is take over. Cause I just know my best thinking would get me put in the dirt, and I don't, I love too many people to let that happen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I feel like
It's cool, man.
yeah.
Heard
I
some
feel
good
like this
stories
is
down in Texas. My boyfriend in 2020 was in Corpus Christi, so we did a lot of we did a few in-person meetings. It was COVID, so, and some virtual meetings, but yeah, some good stories down in Texas.
as we're kind of wrapping up and nearing the end of the time we're going to be recording, so I don't know if you can hear my cat, but she's very excited right now. You know, knowing that there are people who are going to be watching this, who are going to be listening to this, who may be struggling or may be, close with somebody who's struggling, do you have any last just suggestions, first steps, just like a takeaway that you want to give quickly and clearly before we finish up?
I think David had a good point with not giving up on yourself, which is so hard to do if you're in the throes of a breakdown or a meltdown or a severely awful mental health episode. But asking for help, surrendering, understanding that you're powerless and that you need help, and that there are people in your life, whether you realize it or not, that want to help you. They may not be people that you know, but they're out there, and just to lean on others, because so much healing is done through connecting and community with other people. It's not meant to be done alone. We are social creatures, and we should lean on others. I think that's, in short, what I would say.
Yeah.
I would echo everything she said, and I would say that a lot of the times if it's uncomfortable, I'm speaking specifically to recovery, if it's uncomfortable, you're in the right spot. This
So
should not
recovery
be,
and conditioning.
yeah, it's not going to be a freaking fun process. It's really not. Like you've, so if you think of it as a physical injury in circus, right? I had reconstructive surgery on my shoulder. If I think about the rehab process that was 10 months long and the range of motion and all that, it sucked. It was painful. It was monotonous. The doldrums were real. And, but it was the consistency and the discipline. So if you're addicted, you've given your addiction the right discipline and time to pick up that pipe or that needle or whatever, the bottle. You've had no problem putting a bottle to your lips. So why not use the same and put it towards your recovery?
And now your shoulder's functional. I have a plate and 6 screws on my shoulder, so I'm with you there.
Yeah, I had fully blown, gone high bar, too much high bar.
Yeah, that's a really good metaphor, I think, too, is that it's not fun. That's been something that's been holding me back from wanting to get back into therapy, is that I don't want to look at this shit. I don't want to unpack it. I've packed it very deeply and neatly away into suitcases way in the back of my mind that are stacked neatly and organized. And then they every now and then they all fall over, and then I'm like, oh my God, I'm in crisis. So yeah, I think just like being okay with being uncomfortable and being okay with not being okay for once.
Yeah, it's normal. And the last thing I'll say is there's a story about the cows and the buffalo in Colorado. You're in Colorado.
I haven't
It-
heard this story though.
okay, so the storms come from west to east, right? Well, like the cows, they see the storm coming and they're like, yeah, no thanks. That looks miserable. So they start to run east.
Mhm.
So the storm's coming and the cows are like, I'm getting the hell out of here. So they go, the storm catches up, and then the storm just stays with them. So the cows keep going because they don't want to get wet, or the storm actually keeps going east. So they're screwed. Buffalo, they look at the storm and they're like, yeah, buffalo go into it, it passes.
Yeah.
I think you always have to remember, I always have to remember that what is bad is going to get good. If there's a down, it's going to go up. If there's a negative, it's going to be a positive, and it's going to kind of ebb and flow. And the goal is just to get the ebbs and flows to not be so great, and just understanding that there's ebbs and flows in life, and it is what it is. You just got to get,
buffalo.
yeah, just be a buffalo.
Amazing. We're also going to include in the description for the episode a couple links to specific resources for folks who are kind of looking at that first step of like reaching out for support if you want to reach out to an organization as opposed to a friend or somebody that you already know. But I just want to take a moment to thank you both, David and Waverly, absolutely from the bottom of my heart for being here, for your time, for your vulnerability, for your honesty, for your humor, just for all of the realness that you brought to this conversation, which can be a very uncomfortable and difficult conversation to have. I also want to thank CircusTalk for making space for this and for wanting this and hosting it and knowing that it's important and wanting to put it out there for the circus community. And I want to thank everybody who's watching and listening for your time and for your attention and interest and for being here for this really, really important work. So thank you, everybody.